What if the big tech companies are actually not competing for our money? What if there's actually something far more valuable that they are competing for, which is your behavior, my behavior? You see, this is the realization I came into when I read this book last year. This book titled Automating Humanity. Right. So this book got me thinking about technology in ways I hadn't before. Right. I got to know about this book after watching a documentary titled Social Dilemma on Netflix last year. I would recommend that everyone actually could watch that documentary too. Social Dilemma. In that documentary titled Social Dilemma, they were talking about some of the the danger, right, the societal impact of particularly social media on this our current generation, right? And in fact, some of the people that spoke in that documentary were actually people that built these platforms, right? I would actually recommend that people go to everyone watch that documentary. But at the end of that documentary, a couple of resources were actually recommended as a follow up to some of the ideas and the topics that were discussed in that documentary. And I decided to get some of the books, right, that was recommended. And one of them was actually this book titled Automating Humanity. It was written by Joe Toscano, right? I read it last year and I've also finished it again this year. Most times I enjoy reading a book twice. Right. So one of the reasons why I decided to read this book was being a software engineer myself. There are actually sometimes I've actually seen some things, I've actually questioned some things, but I didn't understand some of those things until I read this book. Right. Now, this book, basically, in this book, Toscano was basically talking about the societal impact of technology. And, I think this is a book everyone should read, no matter your discipline. This is not a technical book. And one of the things I find fascinating about this book is that, despite the fact that it's talking about, technology, right, they were not overuse, or in fact, overuse of technical parlance. Right, in this book is written in plain language for any reader to pick up. Right, the last time I checked, about 72 to 79% of the world population are on internet. Right, and this that's a large percentage, and it's very important that people begin to know some of the effects of the products we are using, some of the effects of the apps we are using on our behavior, on our health, on our mental capability, on our everything that surrounds us as humans. And if I'm to summarize this book in one statement, I will say that the argument of Toscano in this book is that now gone are the days when digital systems are being created and developed for human flourishing. But they are now being digital systems, products are now being optimized for behavioral influence, for capitalism, for massive profits, and for to mine data, right? So in fact, I'm going to be talking about some of the ideas in this book. But if I'm a lover of books, right, or if I'm not so much a lover of books, there are some books you will see, right? There are some physical practice of a book you will see that you just fall in love with that books. This is one of those books, right? Toscano being a from my experience, being a design consultant actually shows in the way he wrote these books, right? There were a lot of infographics. There were a lot of the whole design. Design is just very so captivating, right? So it's one of the books I would like to put at the at the front of my shelf, right? So I will advise that I will really recommend that everyone go to this book. In the previous video, right? So this channel is not just about book review or summarizing books or talking about books, but we are going to be discussing key ideas in any book we picked. We're going to be having intellectual conversations. We're going to be dissecting. We're going to be reviewing key ideas in books. Good books gives information, but great conversations actually help us to understand those information, and that's why I want us to talk about ideas we find fascinating and intriguing in books we read. So now, back to automating humanity, right? Some of the key, I just want to talk about 2 or 3 of the key ideas I find really fascinating in this book, and one of them is what Toscano mentioned, that humans have become data. Right? Human beings have become data. I think in chapter 2 of this book, it's called. The title of this book is titled to Data Over Everything. And when you think about it, especially on social media, right? I'm making reference to social media because that's what everyone can actually relate with, right? On social media nowadays, every damn thing is being tracked, right? A location is being tracked. Our likes are being tracked, our reactions are being tracked, the people you interact with are being tracked, your behavior is being tracked, every damn thing is being tracked. I know as a software engineer myself, I see data collection as a harmless telemetry, but from reading this book, it has forced me to actually ask a deeper question. What happens when humans become data collection metric? Right? What happens when humans become a data collection metric, whereby the whole value, right, that these platforms, that these big tech companies, the whole value of the engineering, the algorithms, the engineering of these algorithms is to get as much data as possible from human. Toscano said something in this book. I don't know if I can find it. He said something so profound. He said, the fundamentals of human life are being manipulated in the pursuit of mining more data, and that is something I can literally relate with, right? Something, the way the interface have been designed. Look at, for example, on social media, and we have infinite scrolling, infinite feeds, right? The more you go down, the more you see content. The more you see content, the more you see content, right? These are psychological engineering. These are psychological engineering to get people more hooked, to get people more engrossed, right, in using the platform, right? It is not just about it's not just about giving information to people again. It's not just about serving people. It's not social media is not just about getting people more connected again, right? It's now about serving people, getting people to just use the platform. And another thing similar to that from the first idea I mentioned is the fact that Toscano said he mentioned something called attention economy. Right, that the internet, the economy of the internet, or the currency of the internet nowadays is the currency of the internet is now attention. Right, our attention is now actually the currency that is being traded on the internet, and it's mentioned that attention economy is not neutral, but unfortunately, we users are actually on the losing end of this transaction. Now, what do I mean by that? The more time we spend, now these algorithms, these platforms have been designed such that we are hooked, of which a lot of people are already hooked and addicted to this platform, but you're actually getting something in return for this attention you are giving, right? One of the things we are getting return, right? We are getting return is some of the negative externalities of this stuff They talk about postural deformities. And you literally see, in fact, there was a research conducted that you mentioned in this book where, in an hospital, people are now, the rate at which people are complaining of back pain and the rate at which young people are now having, curved neck or hunchback, that kind of thing is now alarming. And that can be tied to, the advent or the increase in the usage of social media. Right. Another thing you talked about, one of the things you actually gain from giving your attention to this platform is what we call sleep disorders. And it's something I've personally experienced before, right? All this late night scrolling, all these, basically getting addicted, jumping from one social media platform to another, right? It actually disrupts your, our circadian rhythm and basically causes sleep disorders. Sleep disorder. And the other thing you talked about is loneliness and depression, right? Especially that is more, depression is more profound. Research conducted in US where, the younger generation, people of teens are now complaining of depression. And then he said something, there's a particular word he said, we are now alone together, right? Social media, it looks as if, okay, we are the internet, it looks like everybody is now more connected and that kind of stuff. But people in reality, right? In reality, these connections are actually superficial. They don't translate into real life. We are now alone together. We are now alone together because, before the advent of social media, before the advent of, internet, there were not much cases of depression, right? But now, younger generation, younger people are now complaining of depression. So this is one of the things, this is one of the negative externalities of giving our attention to this, to this platform, to this social media algorithm. And he basically said, we are already hooked in this generation. We are already hooked to these platforms. We are already hooked to these products. And then he mentioned another thing. He said technology shapes behavior. Right? Technology basically shapes our behavior nowadays. When you observe, I'm kind of a person that observe my surroundings sometimes. Sometimes when I'm in public spaces, let me give an example of when I'm in church, right? People can no longer sit for or be still for 15 minutes, 20 minutes without picking their phone, right? Subconscious, it's something that happens to me too. Right? Before I began to consciously monitor myself and abstain myself from just picking phone. It's not about I did sometimes it's not about receiving notification or there's an emergency. You just observe that, okay, you just pick up your phone. Sometimes the first thing when you wake up in the morning, we pick up our phone. So you can see that there's way technology has already shaped our behavior in that manner, right? The technology has shaped the very facets, the very fundamentals that makes us humans, right? It doesn't, as humans, we are supposed to have agency, right? But now a lot of people don't have agency anymore. We don't have agency anymore because we are now being manipulated by algorithms through notifications, through constant feeds, through streaks, right? Through all these recommendation algorithms, we are now being manipulated. So all these technologies are actually being manipulated, are actually being engineered, right, to serve the purpose of these big tech companies. And this is the reason why Toscano is making this information, is democratizing this information, right? It's not it's not painting technology in a bad manner, or it's just the essence of this book is just to get more people aware, right? Get more people informed about the negative effects of the technologies, the apps, the platforms we use nowadays. And then you mentioned about a couple of other things which I'm not going to be talking about today. And then another idea that I also find intriguing is the fact that previously or generally we will say that, okay, technology has actually helped humanity, which is true. And technology has made our lives more convenient, has also improved our standard of living and this kind of stuff. But when you consider it deeply, and then when you look at things critically, right? This convenience that we enjoy with technology actually comes at an hidden cost, right? There's a cost for this, all this convenience, and one of the major costs of this convenience is our privacy. Right, there's literally no privacy. In case we don't know, there's literally no privacy on the internet nowadays. Everything, right? Everything is being tracked. These top companies knows all your digital trade, digital footprint, and this kind of stuff. Right? Because the more they know about us, the more they know about our users, the more data, right? The more adverts they can show, and then the more data they have about a user, the more relevant the ads they can show, and then the more money to them, right? The more money to all these big tech companies. That's why every year they keep having a big turnover, right? But when you look at this, at the detriment of, the very fundamentals of humanity, right? Our psychology is being affected, our social life is being affected, and one thing that even kind of keeps me one thing that is very alarming is the fact that we can no longer generally, and this has been backed up by research, right? People can no longer focus nowadays. We've lost our focus, right? The ability to sit down and read, the ability to sit down on idea and ruminate on idea, the ability to spend time and solve problems are being eroded, right? Are being eroded by technology. Sitting down to solve a problem, right, requires discipline, requires deep focus, and requires one to spend more time, right? Spend more time, and this doesn't offer instant, or doesn't offer quick rewards, right? To solve a problem, to read a book, to ruminate or to think over an idea, it might take you hours, it might take days, right? But the ability to do this is being secretly destroyed by exposure to the constant rewards of social media, by constant reward to internet. Because now on the internet, when you see one post, right, before you finish reading the post, something has automatically, the algorithm has automatically feed you with another post. So all those kind of constant dopamine hit, right, constant rewards, right, are not something necessary to actually build the mental capability, to actually build the mental strength to for solving problem, right, for deep focus. That's why nowadays we've generally lost our ability, right? We've generally lost our ability for deep focus, for deep intellectual conversations nowadays, and that's one of the reasons why, and that's one of the main thing Toscano was talking about in this book. People should become more aware of these things, so that we can begin to re-engineer ourselves to combat these things, right? So we are still going to be talking a lot more deeper into each of these ideas, each of these concepts in future in the subsequent videos. The whole point of this book is not to paint technology in a bad way, or say technology has not been impactful, has not been helpful for humanity. Of course, no one can deny the positive impact of technology, right? But we need to begin to ask ourselves, right? There has been a lot of deviations in the fundamentals of technology, right? There has been a lot of deviations from technologies that we have, in the 90s, to the technologies that we have nowadays, right? As I've said earlier, the fundamentals of these technologies are, are being built on manipulation, are being built on, human psychology and this kind of stuff. So, generally, I think, you know, technologies, right, are no more being designed, are no more being optimized, right, to help humans, right? Technologies are now being optimized to manipulate users, to manipulate humans, and that's the idea that these books aim to democratize, right? So, you see, while I agree with some of the things that was mentioned in this book concerning, attention, economic concerns, data collection concerns, and human behavior manipulation concerns, this kind of stuff, right? The fact is that now technology itself isn't evil, right? That's one, and then the same tools that we are, the same tools that they're actually distracting us, right? These tools are actually also educating us. So maybe now the problem is actually not the tools, right? But on the incentive structures on these tools, right? The incentive structures in terms of, okay, now these companies are getting users data, right? These companies are mining users behaviors at a very alarming rate and at a manipulative in a manipulative way. So, I mean, could there be a structure whereby these companies will actually be paying us for our data? I mean, that's how that's how I see it, right? Should big tech companies now begin to pay? I mean, when you look at it, financial, how do they say that, their financial turnover every year, you know, these companies announce millions or billions of dollars every year. So should they begin to actually pay users some amounts for for getting our data? And so we are still going to be discussing more of this, some of the concepts in this book in great detail in the following following videos. I mean subsequent videos. But then generally I feel this is a book everyone should read. Right, this is a book everyone should read. Right, it's a very interesting book. Right, talks about different things, and he also talked about some of the solutions to all these problems. Right, he's a technologist himself, so he's talking about some of the solutions to these problems and how technology can actually be designed. How technology can actually be implemented to serve humanity instead of manipulating humans, right? But the fact is that people need to know about some of these things, and that's one of the reasons why I'm going to be talking about this book in our subsequent videos. There are still a great deal of things we need to know about, so we'll be talking about them in our subsequent video. So yeah, Joe Toscano. This book is not available in Nigeria. I had to order it from UK. Right. So if you want to get it, you might have to order it. But I can bet with you it's a book you will enjoy reading, and it's actually worth the money for it. So yeah, see you in another episode of Automating Humanity. Thanks.